Nearly 8 years ago, one of the most awkward dinner dates in the history of American politics took place in the green room of the White House. It was the 27th of January 2017. Donald Trump had been president for 1 week, and he'd requested that the FBI director James Comey join him for dinner. Comey arrived thinking it would be a group of people dining with the president, but the table was only set for 2. He was uncomfortable. He didn't want to interact with Trump more than was absolutely necessary. In a group meeting earlier that week, Comey had tried to hide from Trump by wearing a suit the same colour as the White House curtains and standing in front of them trying to blend in like a 6'8" chameleon.
Oh, and there's James.
He didn't want to get too close to the president. It wasn't personal. He didn't think that any FBI director should be buddies with any sitting US president. Sitting opposite each other as White House staff served them dinner and drinks, Trump said something that deeply concerned Comey.
Near the beginning of the meal, he asked for it exactly that directly, saying, I need loyalty, I expect loyalty, or maybe it was the reverse, but he was asking for loyalty.
And what did you say when he asked for that?
I said nothing. I just stared at him.
Just unbelievably awkward.
I just stared at him while a little voice was inside my head saying, don't move, don't say anything, don't move.
I mean, Trump is not a Tyrannosaurus Rex, James. You can't hide from him just by sitting still.
I know that sounds weird, but in the moment, that was all I could think of to do because I was so shocked by the fact that a president of the United States would ask the FBI director for loyalty.
Trump, apparently still able to see Comey clearly, demanded it a second time.
When he returned to it and asked for loyalty again, I responded, you'll always get honesty from me. And that connected to things I had said earlier. And then he paused and he said, that's what I want, honest loyalty.
Trump and Comey's relationship ended badly. Trump sacked him for disloyalty.
He's a showboat, he's a grandstander. The FBI has been in turmoil, you know that, I know that, everybody knows that.
Now, 8 years later, as Trump returns to the White House, I don't think he's going to have this kind of issue again. His second administration will be very different from his first. And a big part of that is because of the 2020 election, because of these 64 days we've been talking about all through this series.
I said, are you out of your effing mind?
We're nice people, but when you treason our country, we'll drag your ass.
They're literally calling for the vice president to be effing hung.
Trump has only asked me for 2 things. He asked me for my vote, and he asked me to come on January 6th.
So much is going on.
Those days taught Trump, his allies, and the people he now calls his enemies a valuable lesson. Loyalty is everything.
We could use some more loyalty, I will tell you that.
In the first Trump administration, senior advisors and people in important roles like James Comey learnt that the hard way. After January 6th, everyone in Trump's orbit knew what they were signing up for. And those are the people that he's taking with him this time. He's picked South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem as his Secretary of Homeland Security. She grooved with Trump to Ave Maria and YMCA for half an hour on stage last month.
President Trump!
He's picked his #1 supporter in Congress, Matt Gaetz, for Attorney General.
I went out on patrol.
And he's picked a Fox News host named Pete Hegseth as his Secretary of Defence. I'm Matt Bevan, and from If You're Listening, this is the 5th episode of America's Last Election. So right behind the White House, on the other side, is Lafayette Square in Washington, D.C. And if not for what happened on January 6, 2021, what happened there 7 months earlier would have entered the history books as the most memorable moment of the Trump presidency.
Black Lives Matter!
It was late May 2020 and Black Lives Matter protests were raging outside the White House. The protests were big and in the daytime didn't cause any concern for authorities.
As you can see behind me, there are hundreds of protesters gathered down here today. It is really peaceful. There's a lot of chanting going on, but we haven't seen any sort of violence yet today.
After dark, it was a different story.
Everybody's not here to be violent, but it's going to get violent tonight. That's what's going to happen.
Just a block away from the seat of power, angry voices echo through the night. This violence rocking many states across the country shows no sign of ending.
Trump was furious. He thought that a protest like this on his doorstep made him look weak. His 34-year-old advisor, Stephen Miller, started drawing up plans for the military to come in and crush the protests, calling them an insurrection. But the military wasn't interested. In the Oval Office, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, quite literally told Stephen Miller to shut the bleep up, right in front of Trump. Then a few nights later, things escalated. Someone vandalised and set fire to a church on the side of Lafayette Square, the St. John's Episcopal Church.
They burned down a big section of it. Fortunately, they were able to catch it in time. This is a church built at a similar time as the White House.
Trump demanded that his Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, and top General Mark Milley join him in the Oval Office to sort all this out. Esper's soft tone of voice and insurance salesman aesthetic hid the fact that he was in the military for 21 years. Trump liked to call him Yesper, although Esper wasn't quite sure why. Huh? There were no nicknames on that day, though. The president was in a rage. Esper later told US TV program 60 Minutes that the president was shouting and ranting.
He's using a lot of, foul language. You all are effing losers, right?
He was demanding that Esper and Milley deploy 10,000 military troops to the Capitol to disperse the protesters. Now, this wasn't their first rodeo. Esper and Milley were used to rebutting insane ideas inside the White House. Less than a year before, he and Esper had also had to tell Miller that no, we can't decapitate the leader of ISIS, dip his head in pig's blood and display it as a warning to other terrorists. That would be a war crime. This time, President Trump was demanding something that both men considered a massive overreach. Trump wanted them to invoke the Insurrection Act, which would allow them to deploy soldiers against the American people and stop the protests with force.
To deploy paratroopers into the streets of Washington, D.C., and I'm thinking with weapons and bayonets. And this would be horrible.
When they said that this was a bad idea and that people would get killed, Trump asked,
"Can't you just shoot them? Just shoot them in the legs or something."
Eventually, Esper and Milley talked him down. Donald Trump denies this account of the meeting, by the way. He told 60 Minutes that Mark Esper was weak and totally ineffective, and because of that, he, Trump, had to run the military himself. As they left the meeting to head back to the Pentagon, both men said that they were on the verge of resigning, but didn't out of concern of who would replace them. Then, in the early evening, both Esper and Milley were called back to the White House. They had been in meetings all afternoon, so neither of them had any context for what happened next. See, that afternoon, pandemonium had broken out in Lafayette Square. It started with a miscommunication between the Secret Service and the local park police. They were meant to work together to put a temporary fence up around the square to move the protesters further away from the White House. The park police would yell at the protesters to leave through megaphones and then march forward slowly and install the fence. That was the plan, but there was a miscommunication. The Secret Service accidentally jumped the gun and entered the square before the megaphone warning was given. Protesters and journalists were beaten as they fled.
A Channel 7 news crew was live to air when they were hit by riot police.
Exactly what it looks like. We're just staying safely. Amelia!
Oh.
Whoa! Amelia, can you hear us?
Amelia, are you okay?
As the sounds of the pandemonium drifted across the White House grounds, President Trump started giving a speech.
Thank you very much.
He said he'd told the governors of each state to use the police and National Guard to end the protests. And
if a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of their residents, then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them.
And he was going to start with the city he was standing in, Washington, D.C.
As we speak, I am dispatching thousands and thousands of heavily armed soldiers, military personnel, and law enforcement officers to stop the rioting, looting, vandalism, assaults, and the wanton destruction of property.
Wait, what? Didn't Esper and Milley just talk him out of that?
Thank you very much. And now I'm going to pay my respects to a very, very special place. Thank you very much.
Esper and Milley had missed all of this. The clash in the square, the press conference that followed. They were waiting in the outer office trying to get some work done while they waited for Trump. And then the president emerged. He wanted to see the church in Lafayette Square, and they were going with him. No more context, just saddle up, cowboys. Trump set off towards the square, and someone told Esper and Milley to follow him. They followed the president out into a cloud of tear gas. Immediately, the two men felt like they were doing something inappropriate. With cameras flashing, Trump marched over to the front of the church and turned to face the media, with a Bible in his hand. He beckoned other members of his staff and cabinet to join him. Milley had already bailed and snuck back to the White House. Esper, like James Comey and his curtains, tried to hide in the crowd of media, but Trump, he spotted him and beckoned. For a few moments, Trump and an assortment of senior advisors stood awkwardly at the church, Trump holding a Bible like he was trying to sell it at an auction. And then it was over.
We have the greatest country in the world. Thank you very much, everybody. We're going to keep it nice and safe.
Milley and Esper went for a walk along the National Mall to the Lincoln Memorial. Both were mortified about what had happened and the signal that their presence could send. They needed to find a way to make it clear that the US military would not be used against American people. Esper held a press conference to try and distance himself from the incident at the church in Lafayette Square with the Bible.
Look, I do everything I can to try to stay apolitical and to try and stay out of situations that may appear political. And sometimes I'm successful at doing that, and sometimes I'm not as successful.
All he knew was that the boss told him and the other cowboys to saddle up.
I was not aware of a photo op was happening.
He told the media that even though the president had told the world that he was about to deploy
thousands and thousands of heavily armed soldiers,
that would not be happening. Esper said no spa.
The option to use active duty forces in a law enforcement role should only be used as a matter of last resort, and only in the most urgent and dire of situations.
You know, like if a massive mob is attacking the Capitol building, threatening to hang the vice president and beating police officers into hospital, something like that.
We are not in one of those situations now.
When Esper got back to his office, his old pal Milley was waiting for him. Milley told him that he'd done a good job and that Trump is going to rip your face off. In an Oval Office meeting, Esper got quite a verbal face ripping. You betrayed me, the president thundered. Because of what you did, I can't use the Insurrection Act. Esper knew that this wasn't true. As the president, Trump could legally invoke the Insurrection Act and deploy the military, and there was nothing that Esper could do to stop him. But Esper didn't tell him that. He just sat there silently. Trumposaurus Rex moved on. In the midst of everything else that was happening in 2020, the pandemic, the protests, and everything that happened next, I think the significance of this moment has been seriously overlooked. In that short period, from the Rose Garden via Lafayette Square and Esper's press conference to the face-ripping meeting in the Oval Office, there was a little tiny coup d'etat in the United States of America. The Commander-in-Chief, Donald Trump, ordered the US military to do something, and they basically just didn't do it. This kind of thing happened a lot in the Trump administration. President Trump made a big effort after he was elected to bring in well-qualified people to fill key roles.
I know the best people. I know the best managers. I know the best deal makers. I know people that will make us so strong. I know guys that are so good.
And in a lot of cases, he did.
Both Mattis and Tillerson, I think both of them are impressive individuals.
According to analysts, it's another appointment aimed at appeasing the Republican establishment.
He's an excellent choice.
But gradually, Trump asked all of them to do something that their conscience or the law would not permit them to do. Sometimes Trump would just forget that he ever asked. Sometimes he would scream at them. Sometimes he would fire them.
President Trump fired his Secretary of State.
Trump says he was sacked. Bolton says he resigned.
Donald Trump sacked the FBI director today.
Jim, I'm sorry, you're fired. Get out of here.
He's the 18th cabinet-level official to exit the administration in less than 3 years.
And word is that there is likely more of this to come.
In the week after the photo op with the Bible, Secretary Esper and General Milley together came up with 4 secret rules, which they called the 4 no's.
No strategic retreats, no unnecessary wars, no politicization of the military, and no misuse of the military.
If Trump tried to force them to do any of those things, they would resign on the spot. They had their letters ready. Esper said no to Trump on several occasions between then and the 2020 election, and when Trump lost, Esper was relieved. It was all over. Trump fired him 6 days after the election, saying he was not sufficiently loyal.
In a tweet, he fired his Defence Secretary Mark Esper, announcing counter-terrorism chief Christopher Miller will replace him effective immediately.
Esper was surprised that it took him so long.
Mark Esper, he wrote, has been terminated.
But General Milley was still there. On Veterans Day 2020, 8 days after the election, there was a ceremony on the steps of the Memorial Amphitheatre at Arlington National Cemetery. Donald Trump was due to appear in public for the first time since Election Day. The race had been called for Joe Biden a few days earlier, but he was yet to concede. Still is. About 20 minutes before Trump arrived, a man in the crowd started feeling unwell. He climbed the amphitheatre steps with significant effort before collapsing. Hollyanne Milley, wife of General Mark Milley, was there. She's a nurse and saw the man struggling. She went to look at what was wrong and realised that he wasn't breathing. She then successfully resuscitated him with CPR. I tell you all this just to note that what Mark Milley did next was only the second most incredible thing that a member of his family did that day.
Today is Veterans Day, and on the 11th day,
Milley had been getting calls from several cabinet members who were extremely concerned about Trump's refusal to concede the election. The CIA director called to say that she was worried that there was a chance of a right-wing coup. General Milley was determined to make sure that this wouldn't happen, and he used his Veterans Day speech to make this point very clear.
We do not take an oath to a king or a queen, a tyrant or a dictator. We do not take an oath to an individual. We take an oath to the Constitution.
If there was going to be a coup, the military would not be involved. As the weeks marched on, of course, Trump turned away from people like General Milley. He brought more conspiracy theorists into the fold, people like Rudy Giuliani and John Eastman, who were supportive of his attempts to overturn the election result.
Wow!
A cabinet member told Milley that the crazies are taking over. Egged on by these people, Trump demanded that his Attorney General launch an investigation into electoral fraud. When he found nothing, the Attorney General told the public that there was no fraud, and then he resigned. It turns out that many people in Trump's White House had their own secret list of no's, different from Milley and Esper's no's, but still similar. Mike Pence certainly had his. Further encouraged by the quote-unquote crazies, Trump demanded his vice president refuse to certify the election results. When he wouldn't go along with it, Trump sent a mob of his supporters in Pence's direction.
All Vice President Pence has to do is send it back to the states to recertify.
Bring out Pence! Bring out Pence!
A Capitol riot was apparently on the no list for a bunch of the officials who were still in the White House come January 6th. In the wake of the violence that day, 4 cabinet secretaries and a wave of other people in the White House resigned as well.
The attack on the seat of US democracy has shocked the nation and caused a flurry of resignations from Donald Trump's own administration over his incitement of the riot and failure to condemn it.
It's clear that most of these people believe that Donald Trump's political career was over. In the past 4 years, many of them not only detailed their time in the White House for those hearings into January 6th, they've also given frank interviews and written tell-all memoirs. When Trump ran for re-election, several former members of his cabinet publicly called him a fascist and urged people to vote for Kamala Harris.
We certainly fall into the general definition of fascist, for sure.
Through Donald Trump's time in the White House, he alienated the people who gave a check to some of his more extreme ideas and impulses. Aside from Trump himself, the only other person in this story who is headed back to the White House is his advisor, Stephen Miller. He of the pig's blood and the protest crushing. But Stephen Miller won't be enough. He's got a whole administration to staff. The selection criteria this time are clear. In fact, there's really only one. Trump isn't looking for impressive resumes. He's not looking for people to challenge him, to appeal to his better angels. He wants people who will not slow walk or refuse his orders. People who won't try and hide in the curtains. People who will just do what he tells them to.
I need loyalty. I expect loyalty.
That's it. What does a second Trump presidency look like when you have people like Stephen Miller in the room and no one left to tell them to shut the F up? We'll find out soon, because for the majority of voters in the United States, Donald Trump has not crossed their no list. Nothing he's done to date has been disqualifying enough to stop them from voting for him. But why is that? Why was January 6th a line for so many of the people around Donald Trump, but not for voters? That's next, in the final chapter of America's last election. I've got to head home.